There are really two texts for this talk. This line from John, light came into the world, but people preferred darkness. And a text from Carl Jung, where he says that he wishes people would own their own guilt because it gives spiritual dignity. Okay. And I'm glad I have a chance to talk to you guys, because this is my last Sunday for a while. By next Sunday, I'll be in Romania. So, and I also realize whenever I speak here that I am the one human being who has spoken probably way too often at this at this church, but I always appreciate the chance to do it every once in a while. Now, I have to confess to begin with that I do not like how our contemporary American culture lives out this holiday season. You know, probably like you, I love Thanksgiving. I just don't like how Thanksgiving gets smothered by endless football. And of course, as soon as Thanksgiving ends, that begins the Christmas shopping season. We have Black Friday and Cyber Monday and Giving Tuesday. I suggest that we could, maybe next year, we could add a Wacky Wednesday, and I'll wake up with shoes on the wall, like in the Dr. Seuss story, because if we can't live out this holiday season in a spiritual way, we could at least live it out in a comic and fun way. Now, Christianity, of course, right now, in this holiday season, it tries to take us in a very different direction, to the quiet, contemplative time of Advent, not shopping. Advent is a time of quiet and stillness, when the cold and the growing darkness and the shorter days draw us inside our dwelling places and inside ourselves to contemplate darkness and light. And every day now, there's a little more darkness, a little less light. And Advent encourages us to go inside ourselves and contemplate the darkness, the growth of darkness, the fragility of light. Even as we head toward that time when we have the longest night and the shortest day, and then we reach that turnaround time where the light grows. Now, most Unitarians think of this darkness and light business as simply a process in nature as we move toward the winter solstice. Some of us are from a Christian background, and we haven't gotten Advent entirely out of us. Christianity during the Advent season draws us in to think of Christ as the light that comes into the darkness of the world. The Christmas shopping season makes us so busy that even Christian communities have lost much of a connection to Advent. There are really, I think, two very different ways to live in Advent. The first is what I'd call the triumphalist way. Advent brings us to think about darkness, but all the while, Christian communities know that Christ is coming and he conquers darkness, so let's get ready for the celebration. It's really a period of just preparing for the win. This triumphalist way is very upbeat, affirming. Maybe it's very American. But the other way of living in an Advent is the monastic way. This monastic way of living in Advent is in no hurry, either to shop or to get to Christmas. And it believes that we need the time to think about darkness, the dark forces in humans and in societies and in history, and about how real they are, And that when light does come into the world, it's opposed by darkness. And that happened to Jesus. It was opposed by so many dark forces in the world. This monastic way of living in Advent believes in taking time to grapple with and contemplate the dark. Now, that gospel that has so much to do with Christ as the light of the world, that's, of course, the last gospel, the Gospel of John. And the Gospel of John, for the most part, is reassuring and affirmative. It definitely has the positive and the affirmative as a major key, but it also has as a minor key these darker undertones. And it tells us first that when the light came into the world did not understand it. And a few chapters later, it gets a little darker. It says, when the dark came into the world, or when the light came into the world, people actually preferred darkness. I guess I have enough Christianity in me that I still feel the need at this time of year to escape the hurried shallowness of the holiday season as our culture lives it and come into this monastic sense of Advent that lives with and contemplates darkness. And so did that person who, for all of these years, was here as my partner and my colleague in all things while I was the minister. And that, of course, is Carol Matheson, who was herself, in so many ways, profoundly musical, profoundly philosophical, and profoundly Christian, with a profound understanding of Christianity, especially Christian monasticism, which is so unusual for a person who was raised as a Protestant. Now is the time of year. I know she would go to the organ and she would play slowly that classic piece of monastic Advent music, O come, O Emmanuel, because she felt, just as I do, the need at this time to draw us in to a deeper, more profoundly Christian, more spiritual, monastic way of living in Advent that does not try to push away the dark and grab onto the light, but tarries with the dark and contemplates it and tries to know it. It's not a fun or easy business to contemplate the dark. That great spiritual musician and songwriter, one of our favorites in our household, Leonard Cohen, as he knew he was dying, his last album, he titled his last album, You Want It Darker? But who wants it darker? Who really wants to contemplate darkness of hatred, oppression, intolerance, violence? You know, this semester has given us two amazing opportunities to go deeper into the darkness. PBS has had a 6-hour series on the U.S. and the Holocaust. And most Americans think that the only relationship America has to the Holocaust is that we beat the Nazis and liberated the camps. So who really wants to go into a darker view of that very complicated subject? And there was also a 4-hour documentary on the United States and Iran. And it presented for the first time, honestly, to the American people, how the CIA tried to get the Truman administration to overthrow the Mossadegh regime. But Truman said, why would we overthrow a democratically elected government? But they convinced Eisenhower to do it. These two, now, I'm living by myself, so I Don and Sebastian are on the other side of the ocean, so in my sad, pathetic life by myself, I have the time to watch a 4-hour documentary and a 6-hour documentary series. But I recommend that. But they are entrances into the dark, to something darker. And really, Leonard Cohen's right. Who wants it dark? Our good friend Doug Mooter, in his weekly Sift, just gave us a good example of the business of facing up to the darkness. He was talking about this horrible shooting at the LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado that happened not very long ago. And he made the point that our country has so much hatred and towards this community, and that hatred is so widely and easily spread through social media that there are going to be more shootings in those places. How could we not think that would be true? Especially when you consider how awash our country is with guns. And Doug also quoted Tucker Carlson saying on Fox to his millions of viewers that, hey, if your kid's teacher is talking about gender and gender confusion, why not be a real man and go in there and just thrash the teacher? A popular and famous and wealthy media personality makes himself even more famous and more wealthy and more popular by encouraging real men to go beat up teachers. How many millions of times has that little clip gone viral to encourage and embolden such violence? Really, it sometimes seems like our culture has gone so far off the rails that all spiritual people need a monastic Advent that never ends. You want it darker? Not me. I myself, despite the fact that I have taught Holocaust and genocide studies, among other things, for 30 years, I am just not a dark side person. I have a lot to think about my own relation to the dark and the light since January 6th. I'd have to say that in all the years of being the minister and all the talks that I have given over the years, the darkest talks I ever gave were like a few talks in the last few years about Trumpism, which has always seemed to me a very dark force in American society. Right before the 2020 election, I talked about Carl Jung's concept of the shadow, that darker, nasty, mean-spirited aspect of everyone's personality. And I said that Trumpism is the unleashing of the shadow side of people, and that we need to be aware of that. And if Trump gets another 4 years, that shadow side might just destroy our democracy. Now that was a darn dark talk in November of 2020. But even in that dark talk, I actually said that as long as Trump does not win, we can look forward to the time when Republicans and Democrats will come together and Republicans will realize that following Trump wasn't the wisest thing to do, and that we'll come together and strengthen our democracy. Even in that dark talk about darkness and about the shadow side of Trumpism, I still took for granted that at least a few days after Election Day, one side would win and one side would lose, and the side that lost would admit that they lost, and we would move on together as a country. Really? What an idiot. You know, there's a great passage in Kierkegaard where he talks about a writer makes a writing mistake. You know, maybe it's a misspelling or a run-on sentence. And this mistake cannot be erased. And it stares back at the author and it says, "You are a bad writer." I have thought so many times about that passage in Kierkegaard, and so many times about that talk I gave. The naivete of that talk after September 11th stares back at me and it says, "You are a naive idiot." You want it darker? I did not want it darker in November of 2020. But we all know it got darker, shockingly darker. You know, and I have to admit, I just can't seem to get over the shock of January 6th. Now, we were in Romania, as we will be on this January 6th. We were together in Romania. It was evening because of the time difference. We were not watching the news. See, we had not told Sebastian that we actually had cable, so as to discourage television watching. You can see why he resents his parents. Romanian friends called and they said, "Hey, do you know what's happening in America?" And I said, "No." So at that point, we had to fess up to Sebastian, admit that we had cable, and turn on CNN. And instantly, I saw what I never thought or even imagined I would ever see. A mob of Americans rampaging through the Capitol building, searching for traitors to try to kill them. I have spent 30 years as a man teaching feminist theory and gender studies. And I look at the TV, and there is a mob of my fellow Americans screaming the B word and wanting to kill Nancy Pelosi. I have met and talked with many Holocaust survivors over the years and have written and taught about the Holocaust my entire adult life. And I look up and see people in our Capitol building wearing Camp Auschwitz t-shirts and shirts that read, "6 million was not enough." All of them there, out of their loyalty to the man that the American people actually elected as our president. The shock of this, I just cannot seem to get over. I cannot integrate it into the normal flow of time. Like September 11th, January 6th is a rupture of time. Time is divided between before January 6th and after January 6th. I still teach feminist theory. I still teach a course on the Holocaust. I taught it this semester. But in some real ways, I cannot do it like I did it before January 6th. I feel like whatever we talk about in those two classes, we should and we need to talk about January 6th. Everything, in some ways, in those classes, runs into January 6th. And that passage from that 2020 talk stares back at me and after January 6th and forces me to think about my own relation to the dark, just why it is, despite everything, that I somehow keep myself from the dark and from doing inside myself that difficult Advent work of living with and facing the dark. You want it darker? I don't want it darker. Who does? We have lived through the darkness of January 6th, all of us Americans. And how many ways have Americans given ourselves ways of avoiding that darkness? To what extent have American Christian churches grappled with the darkness of what they helped create and legitimize, and which we all saw on January 6th with all of those crosses carried into the Capitol? I am sure those churches have twisted themselves around like gymnasts to say, well, that has nothing to do with us. And surely the most common way people are able to avoid the darkness of January 6th is to tell themselves, either in public or inside themselves, well, Trump actually won that election. People really do not like to grapple with darkness. I've had a lot of experiences with that as a Holocaust educator in various countries. In 2000, our Holocaust Museum wrote to the president in Romania wanting documents about the Holocaust in Romania. The president of Romania at that time wrote back and explained that no documents would be forthcoming because there was no Holocaust in Romania. Now, we've made a lot of progress since then. Documents have been given. A report has been, a long report on the Holocaust in Romania came out from our Holocaust Museum with the cooperation of the Romanian government in 2010. So we've made a lot of progress. I spoke at a conference in Romania in 2017. This was a conference in Timișoara about the Holocaust in Romania. So I spoke from the report that was, widely read at that point, I thought, about the Holocaust in Romania. There was a young scholar who was getting his PhD and doctorate in history from the university. He spoke after me, and I was really looking forward to what he had to say. I assumed that he read the report. When I finished, he spoke. And he said, I can't believe an American would come here and tell us about our own history. He went on to say that there was no Holocaust in Romania, and that the Jews of Eastern Romania were not forced to leave. They were simply and politely invited to leave if they wanted to. Nobody wants it darker, or even dark, for that matter. Jung that great psychologist and intellectual, Jung knew so well that that tendency to deny and repress the dark is itself part of the darkness. Part of that human tendency John's gospel warns about, that human tendency to shrink back from light and actually prefer darkness. Jung warned in 1936, he wrote this to the German people. He talked about how Hitlerism had unleashed their shadow. He talked about the hatred towards the Jews that was spread everywhere, allowing political opponents to be beaten up and sent to concentration camps like Dachau, worshiping Hitler. He told them that you have created a tornado while you stand around and you tell yourselves, we're really having fine weather here in Germany. Trumpism has unlocked and unleashed the shadow side of people. The internet is rife with hatred, crazy conspiracy theories, filled with violence and hatred. And we are a culture awash in guns and images of violence. It really does us no good to pretend that it's all fine weather. Jung knew very well that deeply spiritual people are called by things like Advent to grapple with darkness and not to deny it within themselves, in others, in society, in history. We are Unitarians. We are deeply committed to light, to love, to acceptance, to tolerance, nonviolence, to democratic processes, to non-oppression. But at the same time, we also have to be people who do not repress or shrink from darkness, but face it and call it out when it's happening. And we have to be people who encourage other people to have the spiritual strength to look a little more honestly at darkness in its many forms. And maybe that takes the form of opening oneself up to a more critical history for America and the Holocaust, or America and Iran. I think, let's begin now. Wouldn't it be a really good thing if Americans could see the terrible darkness that's happening in Iran right now? The incredibly courageous and rebellious people of Iran have been protesting for months. Their government has responded once again with the darkness of violence, killing their own people. Young protesters are killed, and then their parents are forced to say on TV that they fell out the window. The soccer players from the Iranian team who refused to sing the national anthem in support of the protesters are told that if they do that again, something very bad will happen to them and to their families. The Iranian people are risking their lives to have the world see the darkness they have been living with for so many years. And despite the darkness of all the violence and the repression, they are still in the streets protesting. Perhaps it's a good time for Americans to see the people of Iran not as enemies, but as people who have been struggling against darkness for decades. Perhaps if we do not repress the dark, but really face up to it, we can even recognize that part of their suffering, which is our responsibility. And we can even apologize as the American people for the overthrow of their democratic government in 1953 and the terrible support we always provided to the repressive Shah for so many years. Wouldn't it be amazing for the American people to honestly confront some of our own mistakes and our own dark history and apologize? Could we, the American people, really see the darkness the Iranians are suffering under right now and apologize for our part in their current darkness? Can we look at the dark with that much spiritual audacity during the season of Advent? All Unitarians, all spiritual people are called to be people of light and of the dark. As Jung knew so well, and when he said, if only people could realize what an enrichment it is to own one's own guilt, what a sense of honor and spiritual dignity.